The human skull is made up of 8 cranial bones that surround and protect the brain, and 14 facial bones that form the underlying structure of the face and support for the teeth. With the exception of the mandible, the bones of the skull articulate with each other through joints known as sutures. Throughout the skull, holes known as foramina serve as passageways for blood vessels and nerves. Bones on the surface of the skull encase the brain, protect sensory organs, and serve as attachment sites for the muscles of the head and neck. These bones include the occipital bone, parietal bones, temporal bones, and the frontal bone, as well as the nasal bones, the zygomatic bones, the maxilla, and the mandible. Other bones become more visible only when looking inside the skull.
Now for the skeleton, the bones are joined together at joints. For the skull, the bones of the skull are joined together by fibrous joints, suture. These are one of the sutures between the bones. Sutures, fibrous joint between the skull bones. This is the skull cap, flat bone joined by suture. Now only the temporomandibular joint is a synovial joint between the mandible, lower jaw, and the skull. This is one exception between the joints. Synovial joint, temporomandibular joints. Almost all the rest are sutures, fibrous joint between the skull bones. The vertebral column, each vertebra has a body anterior and vertebral arch posterior. Body anterior, body of the vertebra, and the vertebral arch, neural arch, and in between the vertebral foramen. Now this is the body of one vertebra. The body of the next vertebra are joined together by secondary cartilaginous joints, the intervertebral disc. So this is the intervertebral disc between the bodies of the vertebrae. This is the vertebral foramen where the exit, the nerve, spinal nerve, leaves the vertebral canal. Now this is the vertebral arch joined together by synovial joints and fibrous joints. So the joints here between the bodies, secondary cartilaginous, intervertebral disc, and between the neural arch, synovial joints and fibrous joints. Now for the ribs. The ribs are joined, the upper 7 to the sternum, through synovial joint except the first, primary cartilaginous joints. So synovial joint is present between the ribs and the sternum, upper 7, and between the rest of the ribs. From the back, each rib articulates with the vertebral column. Each rib articulates by واحد synovial joints and another synovial joint with the vertebral column, so that the ribs can move during the inspiration and expiration process. For the sternum is joined to the upper 7 ribs, primary cartilaginous joints, synovial joints, and also there is another secondary cartilaginous joint between the manubrium and the body of the sternum. Another joint between the clavicle and sternum, sternoclavicular joint. This is a synovial joint. Now the upper limb joints. For the clavicle, sternoclavicular joint, synovial joint, and acromioclavicular joint, synovial joint. Between the scapula and the humerus, the shoulder joint between the scapula and the humerus. Between the humerus and radius and the ulna, this is the elbow joint, synovial joint. Between the radius upper part and the ulna, this is superior radio-ulnar joint where pronation and supination occur. Between the lower end of the radius and the ulna, inferior radio-ulnar joint, synovial joints. And here is the interosseous membrane. This is a fibrous joint connecting the two bones. The radia and the ulna move around each other in the form of pronation and supination. This is pronation and this is supination. So in supination, the two are parallel to each other. Now this is the wrist joint between the radius lower end and the proximal or superior row of the carpal bones. The joints of the pelvis. This is the sacrum, and this is the hip bone, sacroiliac joint. Synovial joint, no movement at all. This is the right hip bone, the left hip bone. This is the symphysis pubis, secondary cartilaginous joint, no movement at all. The two bones, right and left hip bone, and the sacrum and coccyx, they form the skeleton of the pelvis. So this is the bony pelvis, and the joints here are fixed, no movement at all are present between the bones of them. For the lower limb, this is the hip bone, and this is the femur, and this is the hip joint, synovial joint. Now here is the knee joint between the femur, the tibia, and between the patella and tibia. This is a synovial joint. For the lower end of the tibia and fibula, this is the ankle joint between the lower end of the tibia and fibula and the talus of the tarsal bone of the foot, synovial joints. Between the tibia and fibula there are joints but no movement. Upper joint, tibiofibular joint, synovial. Lower tibiofibular fibrous joint, and here interosseous membrane, this is another joint, fibrous joints also.